Imagine someone walks up to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to repeatedly stab your skin with a sharp bone dipped in ash and animal fat. It's going to hurt. It might get infected. You could actually die from this." And your response is, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." That was a completely normal conversation thousands of years ago. Ancient humans were getting tattoos before we had writing, before we had cities, before we had basically anything resembling civilization. And they weren't doing it because it looked cool. They were doing it for reasons that were deeply serious. Sometimes spiritual, sometimes medical, sometimes political. And the full story of why humans have been stabbing ink into their skin for over 5,000 years is genuinely one of the most fascinating things in all of human history. So let's get into it. The oldest tattooed human we have ever found is Otzi the Iceman. Discovered in 1991, frozen in the Alps between Austria and Italy. He died around 3300 BC. That makes him over 5,000 years old. And when scientists examined his body, they found 61 tattoos. Not decorative tattoos, not tribal symbols, just simple lines and crosses, mostly on his lower back, knees, and ankles. And here is what blew everyone's mind. When they mapped those tattoo locations onto his skeleton and compared them to his joints, they found something remarkable. Every single tattoo was located directly on or near a joint that showed signs of arthritis or injury. They weren't decorative, they were medical. Otzi was essentially getting ancient acupuncture tattooed onto his body, marking the exact spots where he felt chronic pain, either as a treatment or as a map for whoever was treating him. 5,000 years ago, medical tattoos on a frozen man in the Alps. But Otzi wasn't alone, not even close. Ancient Egyptian mummies have been found with tattoos going back to at least 2000 BC. And for a long time, historians assumed these were only found on female mummies, dancers, entertainers, lower-class women. Then, in 2018, researchers re-examined some of the most famous Egyptian mummies and found tattoos on male priests as well. High-ranking religious figures, men of serious status and power. The tattoos weren't marks of shame. They were marks of devotion, symbols of their connection to specific gods, permanent prayers etched into the skin. In ancient Egypt, getting a tattoo wasn't rebellious. It was religious. It was the equivalent of wearing a cross around your neck today, except you couldn't take it off, ever. Now let's talk about why this was actually dangerous. The tools they used were nothing like modern tattoo needles. Sharpened bones, fish bones, thorns, obsidian blades. The ink was made from ash, soot, plant pigments, and animal fat mixed with charcoal. And sterilization didn't exist as a concept. Nobody knew what bacteria was. You just stabbed someone with a bone, rubbed in some ash, and hoped for the best. Infection was a very real risk. Sepsis was a very real risk. People absolutely died from tattoos in the ancient world. Not often enough to stop the practice, but often enough that getting one was a genuine act of commitment. You weren't just getting a tattoo. You were making a statement serious enough to risk your life for. In Polynesia, which has one of the oldest and most sophisticated tattoo cultures in human history, tattoos were your biography written on your skin. The word tattoo itself comes from the Polynesian word tatau. When European explorers first encountered Polynesian peoples in the 1700s, they had no word for what they were seeing. So they borrowed it directly. In Polynesian culture, your tattoos told everyone exactly who you were. Your family lineage, your rank in society, your achievements in battle, your spiritual status. A warrior without tattoos was essentially a warrior without a resume, without proof of who they were and what they had done. And the process of getting them was itself a rite of passage. It was supposed to hurt. The pain was part of the point. Enduring it without flinching proved you were worthy of the status the tattoo represented. The Maori people of New Zealand took this even further with a practice called tā moko. Tā moko wasn't just tattooing on the skin. It was carving into the skin. Chisels made from albatross bone were used to cut grooves directly into the face, and pigment was rubbed into the wounds. The result wasn't a flat tattoo. It was a three-dimensional raised pattern carved into the face permanently, and every single pattern was unique. No two tā moko were ever the same, because no two people had the same story. Maori chiefs would sometimes sign legal agreements with European colonizers by drawing their tā moko pattern instead of a signature, because their face pattern was as unique as a fingerprint. In ancient Japan, tattoos had a completely different meaning depending on the century. In early Japanese history, tattoos were marks of spirituality and status. But somewhere around the Edo period, things flipped completely. The government began using tattoos as punishment. Criminals were marked on their foreheads or arms, with symbols indicating what crime they committed. And here's where it gets interesting. The criminals who were marked this way started adding to their tattoos themselves, covering the punishment marks with elaborate designs, taking ownership of what was meant to shame them. This is where the tradition of full-body Japanese tattooing, Irezumi, was born. Out of criminals refusing to be defined by their punishment marks. In ancient Thailand, Buddhist monks tattooed sacred geometric patterns called sakyant onto warriors and devotees. These were believed to provide literal supernatural protection in battle. Invincibility, strength, luck. Warriors would travel for days to receive tattoos from specific monks whose spiritual power was considered strong enough to make the protection real. Muay Thai fighters still get sakyant tattoos before major fights today. The tradition is literally thousands of years old and still alive. In the Celtic world, warriors covered themselves in tattoos and blue body paint before battle. Julius Caesar wrote about encountering British warriors painted and tattooed in ways designed to terrify their enemies. It worked. Roman soldiers described facing something not entirely human. The tattoos weren't just spiritual. They were psychological warfare. Walk onto a battlefield covered in symbols and the faces of gods, and your enemy doesn't just see a man. They see something that might be unkillable. And then there's the darkest chapter in tattoo history. In the concentration camps of World War II, the Nazi regime tattooed prisoner numbers onto the arms of Jewish prisoners. Starting at Auschwitz in 1941, it was designed to dehumanize, reduce a person to a number, strip away their name and their identity. But something remarkable happened. Survivors who lived through the camps often refused to have their tattoos removed afterward. Because those numbers represented survival. They represented the fact that this person endured the unendurable and came out the other side. A mark designed to destroy identity became a mark of survival, of witness, of refusal to be erased. So what does all of this mean? It means that for as long as humans have existed, we have had this deep, unstoppable need to write things on our bodies. Make ourselves legible to the world. To say, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I have survived. This is what I belong to. The tools have changed. The meanings have shifted. Different cultures have used the same practice for completely opposite purposes. But the core impulse is always the same. I am here. I have a story. And I want it written somewhere that can never be taken away. That impulse is 5,000 years old at minimum. Probably much older. And honestly, that's kind of incredible.